Detective Ray Hartman stood in the shadow of the towering skyscraper, the scene of the cipher's latest game. The air was thick with tension, the silence punctuated by the distant hum of the city. Dr. Lily Sterling approached, her eyes locked on the cryptic message left behind. "It's a challenge," she said, her voice steady. Hartman's jaw set. "Then let's rise to it." Together, they began to decipher the message. It was a complex code, one that seemed to weave together elements of literature, history, and mythology. As they worked, they could feel the cipher watching them, taunting them. The cipher, whoever he or she was, seemed to delight in the dance of intellect between hunter and hunted. Hartman called in his team, and they spread out across the city, following the breadcrumbs the cipher had left for them. They chased down leads and intercepted messages, their progress marked by a series of increasingly cryptic messages left in their wake. The cipher seemed to be leading them on a wild goose chase, but Hartman knew better. The cipher was playing a game, and Hartman intended to win. The days turned into weeks, and the tension began to take its toll on the team. Some of the younger detectives grew frustrated, questioning Hartman's methods and sanity. But Hartman remained steadfast, his eyes fixed on the prize. He knew that the cipher was only a step ahead, and that if he could just stay close enough, he would finally catch his prey. Meanwhile, Dr. Lily Sterling worked tirelessly in the background, unraveling the mysteries of the cipher's mind. She pored over ancient texts and obscure manuscripts, searching for clues to the mastermind's identity and motivations. Her findings were met with skepticism by some, but Hartman knew better. He trusted her instincts, and he knew that she was the key to unraveling the code that was the cipher. The chase showed no signs of slowing down. The cipher seemed to be drawing them deeper into a labyrinth of their own making, taunting them with each cryptic message and daring them to catch up. As they raced against time, Hartman began to wonder if he had underestimated his adversary. Perhaps the cipher was not simply a criminal mastermind, but something more sinister, something beyond their understanding. The team was stretched thin, and tensions were high. There were whispers of mutiny and doubt, but Hartman refused to let them break his focus. He knew that the cipher was waiting for them to slip up, to grow weary of the game. He couldn't let that happen. Finally, after weeks of relentless pursuit, they received a message unlike any they had seen before. It was a direct challenge, a meeting place where Hartman could finally come face to face with the cipher. The trap was set, and the hunter had been lured in. Now all that remained was to see if Hartman's instincts were as sharp as he believed them to be. As they arrived at the meeting place, a dimly lit alleyway hidden deep in the heart of the city, Hartman took a deep breath and steeled himself for the confrontation to come. Dr. Sterling walked silently at his side, her eyes darting left and right, searching for any sign of their elusive quarry. They rounded a corner, and there he was, the cipher, standing at the end of the alleyway, his features obscured by shadow. Hartman drew his weapon, his heart racing with a mixture of adrenaline and anticipation. The cipher smiled, and for a fleeting moment, Hartman thought he saw recognition in those dark eyes. The cipher raised his hand, and a deafening gunshot echoed through the alleyway. As the smoke cleared, Hartman stared in disbelief at the body of a man slumped against the wall. It was not the cipher. It was a decoy. The real mastermind was still out there, laughing at them from the shadows. Hartman cursed under his breath and signaled for his team to move in, but it was too late. The cipher had vanished once more, leaving nothing but another cryptic riddle in their wake. As they searched for any clue that might lead them to the cipher, Hartman knew that the stakes had never been higher. The game had only just begun, and he was determined to see it through to the end, no matter the cost. For he was no longer simply a detective, chasing a criminal. He was a hunter, stalking his prey across the dark and twisted streets of the city. And the cipher, whether he knew it or not, had just made a fatal mistake. The cipher had underestimated Hartman's resolve. He had forgotten that in the game of cat and mouse, it was the hunter who had the upper hand. For while the cipher was forced to remain hidden, always one step ahead, Hartman could strike at him from any direction, at any time. It was a delicate balance, this dance between predator and prey, and Hartman knew that he had to tread carefully, lest he make a misstep that could cost him everything. With the weeks turning into months, the trail grew colder. But Hartman refused to give up. He followed every lead, no matter how thin, and he trusted his instincts when others doubted them. It was during one such pursuit, deep in the heart of the city's seedy underbelly, that he finally caught a break. A flicker of movement in the shadows, a flash of color that didn't quite belong. He hesitated for just a moment, his heart racing, before drawing his weapon and charging forward. As he rounded a corner, he found himself face to face with the cipher. The mastermind was standing before a graffiti-covered wall, his back turned to Hartman. In his hand, he held a can of spray paint. Hartman tensed, ready to spring, but something about the scene didn't quite add up. The cipher's posture was too relaxed, his movements too fluid. He didn't seem to be expecting danger. With a sinking feeling in his stomach, Hartman realized that he had been wrong. This wasn't the cipher at all. It was a other decoy, meant to distract him from the truth. The real mastermind was still out there, laughing at him from the shadows. Hartman cursed under his breath and signaled for his team to fall back. But it was already too late. The cipher had disappeared once more, leaving them no closer to catching their elusive prey. The chase continued, more brutal and unforgiving than ever before. Hartman's mind raced as he tried to anticipate the cipher's next move, to second-guess his every thought. He pored over ancient texts and obscure manuscripts, searching for some hidden clue that might lead him to the mastermind's lair. But try as he might, he could not shake the feeling that he was getting closer, that the end of this long and winding road was finally within reach. One night, as he sat alone in his office, poring over yet another cryptic message from the cipher, he received a strange package. It was unmarked and unlabeled, but he recognized the handwriting on the return address instantly. It was from the cipher himself. With trembling hands, he opened the package, revealing a single sheet of paper. Written across it, in neat, elegant script, were the words, "I see you, Detective Hartman. You're almost here." Hartman's heart raced as he stared at the words. Could it be that he had finally found a weakness in the cipher's armor? A chink in his armor that he could exploit? He didn't know. All he knew was that he had to take this chance, to push forward, to finally bring the cipher to justice. With renewed determination, he rose from his chair and set out once more, following the thread that would lead him to the end of this twisted tale. The hunt continued, the stakes higher than ever before. Hartman's team moved through the city like ghosts, silent and deadly as they tracked their elusive quarry. They followed every lead, no matter how small, knowing that this was their last chance to bring the cipher to justice. The mastermind had underestimated them once again, and this time, they were determined to make him pay. One fateful night, as they closed in on their target, they received a message from an anonymous source. It was a single word. Tonight. Hartman knew that this was it. The endgame was at hand. He gathered his team around him, their faces grim and determined, and they set their plan into motion. Hours later, they found themselves standing before an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. The cipher's lair, if the information they had received was correct. Hartman signaled to his team, and they moved in, weapons drawn. They crept through the darkness, their footsteps muffled by the dust that coated the floor. The air was thick with anticipation, the sound of their breathing loud in their ears. As they ventured deeper into the warehouse, they stumbled upon a hidden chamber, its entrance concealed by a false wall. Inside, the chamber was lit by flickering candles, casting eerie shadows across the walls. Hartman's heart raced as he realized they had found it, the hideout of the cipher. The cipher, who had eluded them for so long. The cipher, who had left a trail of death and destruction in his wake. The chamber was filled with cryptic messages, scrawled on the walls and floor in the same elegant script they had seen in the cipher's notes. Each message seemed to lead them deeper into the mastermind's twisted web. Hartman motioned for his team to split up, each taking a section of the chamber to examine the messages more closely. As they began to decipher the codes and ciphers, they discovered a hidden message that seemed to be the key to unlocking everything. It read, "The answer lies within the first 5 messages you decoded." Hartman's team exchanged glances, their minds racing. They quickly re-examined the messages they had already deciphered, searching for the ones that might hold the key to the cipher's identity. After several tense minutes, they found it. The first message revealed that the cipher's true name was, in fact, not his true name at all. It was a code word, a pseudonym he used to hide his true identity. Excitement surged through Hartman as they realized they were finally close to the end. He signaled to his team, and together they began to piece together the clues that would lead them to the cipher's true identity. As they continued to work, they uncovered a hidden passageway behind a bookcase. It led them deeper into the warehouse, deeper into the heart of the cipher's lair. The air grew thick with anticipation and fear as they knew they were getting closer to their target. Finally, they emerged into a small, dimly lit room, where a lone figure sat at a desk, surrounded by computers and monitors. The cipher. Hartman's heart pounded in his chest as he took in the sight of their nemesis. After all this time, they had finally found him. Slowly, they inched closer, their weapons drawn. The cipher turned his head, meeting Hartman's gaze for the first time. There was a look of surprise and fear in his eyes, but also a hint of defiance. It was clear that he was not going down without a fight. Hartman steeled himself, knowing that the battle for justice was about to begin. The room was small and dimly lit, with computers and monitors surrounding the cipher's desk. He seemed to be monitoring something on one of the screens, his fingers flying over the keyboard. As Hartman watched, he noticed a strange symbol flashing across the screen, followed by a string of seemingly random numbers. The cipher glanced up at them, his expression one of confusion. It was clear that whatever was happening, it was not part of his plan. Hartman nodded to his team, and they sprang into action. They closed in on the cipher, pinning him against the wall. The cipher struggled, but it was no use. His eyes darted around the room, desperately searching for a way out. Hartman leaned in close, his voice cold and menacing. "You've caused enough pain and suffering," he said. "It ends here." As Hartman spoke, one of his team members began to frisk the cipher, searching for any weapons or devices that might be concealed on his person. Another team member approached the desk, careful not to disturb any of the equipment. They knew that whatever they found here could be crucial to bringing the cipher to justice. Meanwhile, the cipher continued to struggle against his captors, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Hartman could see the fear in his eyes, and he took a small amount of satisfaction in that. But he also knew that they couldn't afford to let their guard down. The cipher was a dangerous criminal, and they couldn't risk letting him escape. As they searched the room, Hartman's team made a startling discovery. Tucked away in a hidden compartment of the desk, they found a small, ornate box. Inside was a key, which when inserted into the keyboard, revealed a secret code panel. The cipher's eyes widened with surprise and fear as he realized what was happening. Hartman's heart raced with anticipation. He had suspected that the cipher was hiding something of great importance, but he never imagined it would be this big. Carefully, he punched in the code, unlocking the panel. A flash drive was revealed, labeled with a series of cryptic symbols. The cipher struggled against his captors, but it was no use. Hartman retrieved the flash drive and held it up for all to see. "This," he said, his voice filled with determination, "is the end of your reign of terror." He turned to his team, nodding in approval. They had done it. They had finally brought the cipher to justice. As they led the cipher out of his lair, Hartman couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction wash over him. He knew that the evidence they had gathered would be enough to put the cipher away for a very long time. And with him out of the picture, the streets would be safer than they had been in years. But even as he relished in their victory, Hartman knew that there would always be another criminal waiting in the wings, another threat to the innocent citizens they had sworn to protect. And so, he vowed to continue his fight against crime, to uphold the law and protect the innocent, no matter the cost. Their journey back to headquarters was tense and somber. The cipher was escorted into a holding cell, his fate now sealed. Hartman and his team knew that they had done the right thing, but they couldn't help but feel a sense of loss. They had taken down one of the most notorious criminals in history, but in doing so, they had also taken away a part of themselves. As they sat in the interrogation room, going over the details of their operation one last time, Hardman couldn't help but wonder what the future held. Would there be another criminal as cunning and elusive as the cipher? Would they ever be able to fully restore order to the city? He knew that these questions would haunt him for days, maybe even years to come. The cipher sat slumped in his chair, his head in his hands. He knew that this was the end. He had been so certain that he could outsmart them, that he could continue to manipulate the city from the shadows. But Hardman and his team had proven to be a step ahead of him at every turn. Now, as he faced the prospect of spending the rest of his life behind bars, he could only reflect on the choices that had led him to this moment. One of the team members spoke up, breaking the heavy silence that had fallen over the room. "So, boss, what happens now? Do we just hand this flash drive over to the feds and wait for the celebrations to start?" Hardman looked at him thoughtfully. "No," he said. "We don't just give up our hard-earned victory that easily. There's still work to be done." He turned to the team member sitting next to him. "You and Jones head up to the lab, see if you can crack that code on the drive. See what secrets the cipher has been hiding. The rest of you, let's get this paperwork in order. We're going to need airtight warrants and evidence chains if we want to make sure this sticks." As they began to disperse, Hardman couldn't shake the feeling that something was still missing. There was a part of him that wished they could have found a way to redeem the cipher, to bring him back from the darkness. But he knew that was a foolish hope. The cipher had chosen his path, and now he must face the consequences. Later that night, as Hardman sat alone in his office, he found himself staring at the framed photograph on his desk. It was a picture of him and his partner, grinning ear to ear after their first big bust together. It seemed like a lifetime ago now. He couldn't help but feel a sense of nostalgia wash over him, a longing for the simplicity of those days when they were just starting out, before the weight of the world had been thrust upon their shoulders. He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out an old, worn leather notebook. Flipping through the yellowing pages, he found the entry he was looking for. It was a quote from one of his favorite detectives, Sam Spade. "The stuff that don't eat no breakfast ain't necessarily kosher." It was a reminder that there would always be another criminal waiting in the wings, another threat to the innocent citizens they had sworn to protect. And so, he would continue to fight the good fight, to uphold the law and protect the innocent, no matter the cost. As he closed the notebook and put it back in the drawer, he heard a knock on the door. It was one of his team members, Jones, with a look of excitement on his face. "Hey boss, we cracked it. The cipher's code. It's a doozy." Hardman sat up straighter in his chair, a spark of interest igniting within him. "Let's hear it," he said, gesturing for Jones to take a seat. "What did we find?" Jones leaned in, lowering his voice. "It turns out the cipher wasn't just using cryptography to hide his messages. He was also using a series of ciphers based on famous works of literature to encrypt the locations of his hideouts and stashes." Hardman's eyes widened in surprise. "You're serious?" he asked. Jones nodded emphatically. "Oh, and get this. The final location is supposedly hidden in a copy of Shakespeare's Hamlet at the local library." Hardman sat back in his chair, a grin spreading across his face. "Well, Jones, it looks like we've got some reading to do." He stood up and stretched, feeling a renewed sense of purpose wash over him. "Let's head over to the library and see if we can find this copy of Hamlet. And from there, we'll bring the cipher to justice once and for all." As they made their way to the library, Hardman found himself lost in thought. He couldn't help but wonder how much more there was to learn about the cipher's past, his motivations and his connections. The more he thought about it, the more he realized that the capture of the cipher was only the beginning. There were countless other criminals out there, waiting to be brought down. Once they arrived at the library, they made their way to the stacks and began searching for the copy of Hamlet that Jones had identified. After several minutes of searching, they finally found it, tucked away on a high shelf. Hardman carefully pulled the book from its resting place and opened it up, scanning the pages for any hidden messages or clues. As he turned the pages, he felt a sense of anticipation building within him. He knew that somewhere within these pages lay the key to finding the cipher's final hideout, and with it, the evidence they needed to put him away for good. He couldn't help but wonder what secrets were hidden within the pages of this book, and how they would change the course of their investigation. Jones leaned in, peering over his shoulder. "You know, Lieutenant, it's almost as if the cipher was leaving us a kind of treasure hunt. A game within the game." Hardman nodded thoughtfully. "Yes," he said, "and we intend to win it." With renewed determination, they continued to search through the pages of Hamlet, hunting for the hidden message that would lead them to the next step in their quest to bring the cipher to justice. As the hours passed, they found themselves lost in the world of Shakespeare and cryptography, their minds racing as they deciphered one clue after another. They discovered that the cipher had been using a complex system of ciphers based on the play's characters, scenes, and even individual lines of dialogue. The more they uncovered, the more intricate and fascinating the puzzle became. Eventually, they stumbled upon a hidden message that seemed to contain the coordinates of a specific location. Excitement surged through Hartman as he recognized the spot on the map as the site of an old abandoned warehouse, long suspected to be one of the cipher's hideouts. They quickly gathered their team and headed over to the warehouse, their adrenaline pumping as they prepared for a potential confrontation. As they arrived at the warehouse, they noticed that the place seemed to be swarming with police officers, SWAT teams, and FBI agents. It was clear that they weren't the only ones who had cracked the code. Hartman felt a pang of disappointment, but he knew that the most important thing was to bring the cipher to justice, no matter who got there first. They parked their car a safe distance away and approached the warehouse cautiously, their weapons drawn. The tension was palpable as they moved through the shadows, careful not to make a sound. Suddenly, they heard shouting coming from inside the warehouse. It was the voice of the cipher, demanding to speak to Hartman. "Damn it, the guy we arrested was another decoy," said Hartman in an angry voice. Hartman looked at his team, his heart racing. "That's our chance," he whispered. "Let's move in." They crept forward, rounding a corner and entering the warehouse just in time to see the cipher, surrounded by officers, making his final stand. As they closed in, Hartman could feel the weight of the moment bearing down on him, the culmination of months, perhaps even years of work, coming to a head. With a sigh of resignation, the cipher turned to face them, his eyes filled with defiance. "Well, Lieutenant Hartman," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm, "I suppose you've finally caught up with me. I expected no less from your deductive skills." Hartman felt a surge of anger as he locked eyes with the criminal who had wreaked so much havoc on their city. He gestured for his team to surround the cipher, ensuring that he could no longer use his quick wit and cunning to escape. As they moved in, the cipher seemed to shrink under their gaze. His posture grew less confident, and his voice wavered. "You know," he said, "it's funny. I've always wondered what it would feel like to finally be caught. To know that all of my plans, all of my hard work, would amount to nothing." He looked around at the officers and SWAT teams that had filled the warehouse, their weapons trained on him. "I guess I was wrong. It feels rather anticlimactic." Hartman stepped forward, his expression stern. "You may have thought you were untouchable, but you were wrong. You left a trail of destruction in your wake, and now you're going to face the consequences." The cipher's shoulders slumped, and he sighed heavily. "I suppose you're right," he said. "I never could deny my own arrogance." As the police officers and SWAT teams moved in to arrest the cipher, Hartman couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction wash over him. They had done it. After all this time, they had finally brought the elusive and infamous criminal to justice. As they led the cipher away in handcuffs, the warehouse erupted in cheers and applause. Even though the battle wasn't quite over yet, it felt like a major victory. Later, as they were debriefing in the interrogation room, Hartman couldn't help but reflect on the events that had transpired. It was hard to believe that it had all started with a seemingly innocuous message left in a copy of Hamlet. The cipher had left them all scrambling, their lives forever altered by his twisted games. And yet, in the end, they had prevailed. The detectives and SWAT teams began to file out of the interrogation room, congratulating Hartman on a job well done. He felt a mix of pride and exhaustion wash over him as he thanked each of them for their hard work and dedication. As the last officer left the room, he turned to face his partner, who had remained silent throughout the entire debriefing. "You know," he said, "I can't help but feel like we've only scratched the surface. There's still so much we don't know about the cipher. I mean, what was his endgame? Why go through all this?" His partner shrugged. "Maybe we'll never know," she replied, her voice thoughtful. "But at least we stopped him from causing any more harm. That has to count for something." Hartman nodded in agreement, but he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this story than they had uncovered. There were threads left untied, pieces of the puzzle that were still missing. As he stared at the empty chair where the cipher had sat only moments before, he couldn't help but wonder what secrets the criminal was taking to his grave. Outside, the city continued to bustle, unaware of the drama that had unfolded within its walls. But Hartman knew that beneath the surface, the battle against crime was far from over. There would always be new enemies, new challenges to face. And as long as he was in the game, he would be ready for whatever came his way. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Please visit my channel for more stories.